Our next session, we're going to hear from some amazing innovators in education. And I'd like to welcome Tim Patston. Now, Patston. Tim is a coordinator of creativity and innovation at Geelong Grammar School in Australia. It's one of our very famous schools that Prince Charles went to when he went on a gap year to Australia. And he's a senior fellow of the Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne. Dr. Patston earned his PhD in peak performance psychology from the University of Sydney. He's a published academic in the fields of creative education, performance psychology, perfectionism, how about that, and positive psychology, including book chapters in the Cambridge University Press publications Nurturing Creativity in the Classroom and Creativity Under Duress in Education. In his role at Geelong Grammar School, he is responsible for developing new programs in creative education for staff and students using the principles of blended learning, the RISE framework of creative education, something he's come up with that he'll tell us more about, developed in collaboration with Professors James Kaufman and David Cropley. And this has been implemented in the school. He's about to tell us all about it. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Pim. Welcome, everybody. Thank you. This is the Centre for Creative Education, which is where I work. We're in a very fortunate position that the organisation I work for is fully supportive of creative education, and we actually are in partnership with 2 universities and a school, which is very unusual. And I'm going to talk to you very quickly about a journey. Now, I know that Todd started with millions of years of history. I've only got 4 years to tell you about, but a lot has happened in the last 4 years. So they gave me a job and said, make the school creative, here's a key, off you go. So first question that we need to ask is the question, come on, yes. How can the theory of creativity inform the practice of teaching? That's the first question you need to ask, because creativity theory is 60, 70 years old. How can it help us to what we do? So we looked in a few areas. Psychology, as we know, is published in many areas. We haven't included all of them, but this was our main area of search because we're looking for creativity in education. Many of you will know the 4 Ps from 1961. The only problem is that language is not really that friendly for teachers. When I spoke in Geneva, I talked about the difficulty of teachers implementing documented policy from educational authorities. They find it quite tough. There's definitional problems, and also there's not really a great deal of help in operationalising creativity in the classroom. It's a really big problem. So, working with James Kaufman and David Cropley, we came up with something called the RISE framework, which actually is an holistic view of the processes of creativity. Without all of these things, creativity is really tough. With all of these things, creativity is very, very possible, to quote Blad. So, let's have a look at environment. Environment is a few things. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, why has he got a picture here of a student's desk? We actually teach creative education for homework. How can you create a learning environment that suits you when you're doing your homework? What are your attitudes and behaviours that enable you to be effective? What are your processes of doing homework, and what are the things that you would like to achieve? The physical environment in which you operate in education, classroom or private study, is incredibly important. There's also the social environment. If you have a social environment which is inhibiting of creativity, in which there is no psychological safety, then it is extremely difficult. And so you need a very open and supportive social environment. Have a look at the students. So this is a class that I was taking 2 weeks ago. What are the attributes that these students are demonstrating? Well, they're showing collaboration, they're showing curiosity, they are not doing graffiti, they're actually doing a high-level maths problem, and they're also showing that creativity requires prior knowledge as well as skills, and they're demonstrating an attitude of curiosity in the way that they work together. Investigation. Here are students actually using the RISE framework to solve a problem in a real class. The students love the language of it. They find it really simple. Environment they understand, student they understand. Investigation is very much what schooling is about. And the last thing, of course, is that there is no point in doing creativity unless you have a result. There has to be a quantifiable outcome. This just happens to be a STEM project, but it could have been any of the projects we're doing. Currently, we have the RISE framework embedded in 12 subjects across 4 campuses, which is a really interesting thing. So that's the framework. And that's actually where I got the idea. You probably thought, why are those shapes so weird? This is a sculpture in the school grounds, and I really like the fact that it's completely symmetrical, but the shapes are all very random and angular. And to me, that's a great representation of what creativity could be, and that's why the RISE framework shapes are the shape that they are. However, that's great, James. Thanks for having a theory. Thanks, David. You've got lots of reading to do, but what do teachers think? Teachers aren't going to do 2.5 years of research. They just want to know what to do. So I had a look. We did an international study of 2,000 teachers from a range of countries and continents. And we asked them these questions. And we've heard a little bit about the myths that teachers believe in. So we were a little surprised, but pleasantly surprised with these results. So, do teachers believe that creativity is the eureka moment, as we've heard about a little bit in the last couple of weeks? Nope. Do teachers believe that it's only for gifted and talented kids? Nope. Do teachers believe that creativity only lives in the arts? This is one that we hear a lot. Nope. Remember, this is 2,000 teachers internationally, yeah? Creativity can't be taught. Nope. They think it can. Interesting stuff, huh? And this is from a range of countries, as I said. Here's the interesting one, can't be assessed. Not really quite sure. And so what we've done is we've actually developed some interventions for that. So now that we know what the teachers think, as good educators, you always start with the teacher's zone of proximal development. And if they don't believe the myths, don't teach them the myths. Just teach them about creativity. So, I constructed a blended learning professional development course. The teachers all had to do a combination of online learning and what we call analog learning. So you'd have 30 minutes of an online lesson that you do in your own time. You then have 30 minutes analog conversation with another human being to discuss your learning. The most powerful thing we did was actually mix teachers up between subjects. So the French teacher works with the sports teacher, the biology teacher works with the English teacher. They then don't talk about their subject, they talk about pedagogy. And getting teachers to talk about pedagogy, purely pedagogy, is tough, but if you mix them up, it works really well. And so this is how it actually looked. That was an online thing. So 200 teachers in 12 months, they all did 12 hours. So that's 2,500 hours of professional learning in 12 months in one institution, plus the analog discussions they had. And so, the teachers then have had 12 months learning what creative education is. How do they actually do it? Teachers, like many people, are risk averse. So I can't say now, just go be creative, you've done the study. No, you can't do that. You have to say, okay, you're an expert in your subject. We know you're an expert in your subject. You now have a little bit more expertise in creativity. What can you do? So I came up with this term called pop-up pedagogy. You all know pop-up shops? They come, they stay. If they work, they stay. If they don't work, they go. And it's a very, very good marketing tool. This is great for teachers. So we said to them, all we want you to do is one teacher, try one innovation in one class for 1 month. That's it. Tiny, tiny, tiny. It can be adjusting the environment. It can be looking at student attitudes. I had one teacher who wanted to work for 4 weeks on how to get more questions from introverts in her classroom using the RISE framework. That went very well. And then at the end of the 1 month, they've got 4 choices. If they liked it but they weren't sure, they could repeat it. If they liked it but weren't sure, they could also refer it to someone else to ask them to try. If it was really stupid and it didn't work at all, it only cost them a few weeks, and so they could reject it. And for the teachers in the audience, you have all tried things that educational theory or government said you had to do that were absolutely terrible. The problem is, if you do it for 2 years, you get very dispirited. If you do it for a few weeks, no big deal. However, if this is a great idea for you, and you know that working on this idea with these students is a good thing for you to do in this subject, within this context, then of course you retain it, and then it becomes a part of your practice. Now, the interesting thing is at the school that I work at this year, this is now compulsory. So every teacher this year must do one pop-up pedagogy project using the RISE framework with a pre-test and a post-test. So in 12 months' time, I will have 200 innovations in education using the RISE framework, fully documented. That's an amazing amount of research to do in a relatively short space of time. And the good thing about this stuff is it's absolutely scalable and it's absolutely transferable. Because if you think about the essence of what we're doing, it actually is an individual teacher making an individual choice for their individual class and their individual students. We're not imposing things. It's why it's a framework, it's not a model. Models are a bit like putting together IKEA furniture. I always have things left over at the end, I'm not sure if you do. So it's a framework. It's also what I call a menu-based approach to educational change. It's not a prescription. The RISE framework is not a pill. It's a menu. And if you try a little bit, if you taste this, then it's all fine. This is actually how it looks for teachers in a classroom. So I'm actually teaching this when I get back. So for the teachers, we have the Year 10 STEM Teacher Toolkit. There's no point in saying to a teacher, the national curriculum says you have to teach creativity, go teach creativity. They must know what it is. They must have a language, and they must have a language which supports their pedagogy, but also getting students to go through a problem-solving process from preparation through the phases up until a reflection. That requires skill for an educator to do it. And so this is actually the toolkit that the teachers have in the classroom. So if they have questions about it, they can actually have a look. We also have a toolkit for the students, which just looks a little bit different to this. The other thing you can see here is if you actually have a look just here at the bottom, that's the RISE framework, but of course within each of the components of the RISE framework, there are a number of factors. So it's not just the 4 things, there's actually a whole bunch of factors underneath that we're actually working on. So for instance, when you're summarising ideas that you've generated, how might you use critical thinking to summarise your ideas? And so if we have a look at the elements of the RISE framework, do you have a tolerance for ambiguity? You might think about just that little aspect. The other thing too is that are you willing to take risks? So if you're summarising ideas, don't just all decide on something, actually think about it from, have you looked at it from multiple perspectives? Have you taken risks in your problem-solving process? So what's very exciting is that the RISE framework received an award last year for being one of the most innovative ideas in Victorian education. I'm sure many of you have heard of the 100 organisation from Finland. For Finland education to recognise our education as being leading and innovative is very humbling, actually. It's like being here. It's a humble experience to be with these people. So the interesting thing is that it is scalable, it is transferable. We are in the process of trialling. Next year I've got some schools in Singapore who are going to try it. I've got some schools in other states. If any of you are working in a school or a university and you think this might be of interest to you, then we're very willing to partner and to do trials. So that's all I have to say for the moment. I'm sure there'll be some questions. Thanks very much to James Kaufman and David Cropley for their work, and also for the teachers at my school. I mean, for 200 teachers to be really doing creative education is just a fantastic thing, and we do want to grow it from here. So thank you very much for your time today.
Do we have any questions from our audience?
Thank you, Tim. That was really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the pre-test and the post-test that you mentioned?
That's up to the teacher for the moment. So let's say, for instance, so the pop-up, I'll take you through the one I talked about with introverts. So I had a teacher who had a class, there was a gender imbalance, there were more boys than girls. She found that there were 2 quiet girls who were high academic achievers, but they never asked questions in class. And she knew that they had something to offer. So she did a little bit of reading about introverts. And this is the other thing too. If teachers have a question, I say, go and do some reading. Go and look at some literature. You've all got degrees. Use them. Use your research skills. And so from researching, she found out that there is a very strong relational correlation between introversion and asking questions in a public forum. So she did some work on that, and the measurement was really simple. How many students did these questions ask in a class before the intervention, and how many questions did they ask afterwards? That doesn't seem like much, but it completely changed the mechanics of that whole class, because what it did, once again to quote Vlad's Possible, it made it possible for the introverts to contribute to the questions. That then meant that there was new perspectives coming into the discussions in the classroom. And it sounds really simple to say, well, they asked one question in the first classes and they asked 5 questions after that. That mightn't seem like much, but it completely changed the environment of the classroom. Vlad.
Are the students aware that this is going on? That
Absolutely.
the teachers are trialling new things?
Yeah, we tell them, hi guys, today we're going to try this. And in fact, what I do, or one of the things that we're introducing to the school, every lesson starts with a purpose statement. We are going to develop the skill of, because you will need it here. It's through the lens of this subject, but we're actually working on skills and attitudes. And so what we're developing at the school is actually a series of skills and attitude competencies, which are independent of education, but part of education. And the academic results so far are looking very promising in terms of going up. Sorry, Vlad had a question.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm going to resist the temptation to add the possible and make it prize instead of rise, but that's something to talk about. You made an analogy with the buffet, so again, obviously caught my attention, but how much flexibility is embedded? So you give activities and teachers can also decide on the content and they work on processes, or they literally do the activities you propose in this beautiful booklet?
No. They have complete autonomy of choice. They're the expert. And I tell you where I've had the most traction is that when a teacher says to me, oh, I've got this piece of work that the students find really boring. I would like it to be more interesting. And so I say, okay, what is the pedagogic outcomes you require? So they have to know X, whatever that is. You want them to know that, is there some ways that you can be more creative in your pedagogy? So teaching with creativity. Or are you actually looking to teach for creativity, which is to develop the creative capacities of your students? They make the choice, they have the discussion. All I do is sit and talk to teachers, which is really nice, because people don't often do that. They're too busy looking through the window in the classroom. Yep.
Okay, you can ask in the... One quickly, we're running over a bit.
Sorry.
Okay, I don't want to be blamed as Marconi for being a businessman, but in a scientific community. But my question is, in your programs, do you have students involved in creativity tasks given by a company?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So if we're doing STEM workshops, then we actually get companies to come in and pose the problems. We do a lot of real-world problem solving. I think the essence to this is creativity is domain specific. If you are a student who is 13 years old being creative in the subject of history, then you are doing creativity in history appropriate for a 13-year-old. That's the level of specificity that we have, because that's the only way this will work. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Tim? I just want to remind you that you wanted to ask other people if they would like to trial the RISE framework, because it is both scalable and transferable. You need to check that it is. So if anyone wants to get in touch with Tim to trial this in their own countries, is it okay to do an advertising spin for you? Tim will share his email address. So next I'd like to introduce Adva Margaliot. Now she's a lecturer at the Education Department at Adva Academic College, but she's about to move and become Dean of a whole new college, and in the International Track for Honoured Student Teachers in Israel. She teaches and develops academic knowledge and courses on creative cognition and on online collaborative learning for pre- and in-service teachers on BEd and MEd programs. her research areas are creativity as a high-order thinking skill in teacher education and as a frame for problem-solving in science in particular. And secondly, ICT in education under the frame of online collaborative learning as a frame for developing new pedagogic insight of the 21st century learning skills. And she's going to talk about what influences the willingness of pre-service teachers to engage in online collaborative learning. Over to you. Please welcome Adva.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Okay, thank you, and thank you so much for hosting such a wonderful, beautiful conference in such an amazing place and very inspiring for me. I think that all our last meetings I was speaking and presenting some kind of pedagogy of developing creativity, and while sending my abstract to this conference, I was sure that this is totally something that never be connected, or I don't know how to be connected into creativity. Then one of the readers suggested the connection, which became to be part of my discussion. So I'm truly grateful to have this chance to make it. So our story, actually, the way we get into this issue was due to a massive missile attack from Gaza Strip into Israel, which take place on December 2008, and later on, obviously, unfortunately, in many other times. And that time, our college, which nowadays I'm living to my new place, obviously was closed, and we were asked to continue our learning via ICT in order to allow our students to keep on going with their academic studies. So very quickly we realized that this will not be possible. Rather, there was developed a very wide-ranging computer-mediated discourse which was take part about their feelings and concerns, some kind of travel talks about the crisis. And it was this online discourse that enabled us to realize that this will be our, I would say, where we will try to do some of our knowledge in order to plan an online course based on collaborative learning, as we saw these trends of this platform. So let's look at what is this pedagogy is about. So we are speaking about a pedagogy in which learners work together to define and promote shared understanding and topics. And maybe most important thing is that the product of the collaboration constitutes a visible process of collaborative knowledge building, and while the character of which can be monitored. Based on this pedagogy, we developed the course in greater detail along the last 5 years, maybe 10 years almost. And our interest now is how willing our students to learn through this model. Since we found no such a tool, we created one based on cognitive orientation theory. I would say now a few words about this theory. It's a theory that posits, it was developed in cognitive psychology sciences. It posits that every action is function of basic motivation, and that the motivation is a behavioral program that implements it. This theory has been successfully implemented to predict and change behavior of different types, such as creativity, decision-making, problem-solving, and vice versa. The main advantage of this approach in this context is that it evaluates motivation in terms of that do not explicitly refer to the behavior measurement, in this case, willingness to share. In addition, it does not require the assumption that behavior is based on rational or conscious decision. It is built on measurement of 4 types of beliefs, and while transforming into online collaborative learning approach and our tool, we use this equivalent between our approach, while in CO they measure these 4 types of beliefs, and here is the equation in our tool. We measured one's own functionality, the experience of online collaborative learning, the ideal functioning in the perspective of the participants and their goals. So our research question was in which are the themes that influence the willingness to engage in online collaborative learning after experiencing it. So this was our participant. We have 57 pre-service students who take part in 2 different pedagogy courses. And we skip up. This was the setting. They were asked to divide into, to self-divide into small group up to 4 students and submit 2 online collaborative tasks. The first was they required, each group was required, to learn and write about a document that explained one out of this list of pedagogy approaches, while in the second task they had to prepare 2 learning activities based on the approach presented by their group and the other. The data was collected anonymous by online questionnaire posted in the website. After course completion, obviously, students responded to both open and closed 4-point Likert items. And in this presentation, I will refer only to this first 2 open question. While they were asked to indicate factors related to their belief about willingness, the beliefs that influence their willingness to collaborate, and like open comment if they had. So the data analysis took place in 2 stages. On the first stage, we did direct approach of content analysis and embedded participants' answers according to the 4 types of beliefs that identified before. And in the second stage, what was it? Yeah. In the second stage, we extracted themes about willingness to engage in online collaborative learning, while theme was defined when the same meaning arose in at least 3 out of 4 types of beliefs. This was made under the assumption of the CO creativity, of the CO theory, which identifies behavioral change when at least 3 types of beliefs are unified. So here comes the results. The themes that arose out of these 2 stages of analysis was 3, the confidence in functioning, perceived value of the collaborative writing, and relevance of the task sequence to their professional development. So here I have this, actually the table that came out of those 2 stages of data analysis. And now I can leave to you the choice if someone is really interested to know some out of this table, since I'm not going to read all of them. So do you want to choose for me? What is mostly interesting you to hear about 2B? Okay, let's see 2B. Thank you, Sergio. So 2B, the perceived value of the collaborative writing process. Here I will read only, let's take the B1, beliefs about the experience of online collaborative learning. So some of quotation, they said that there was always someone who takes responsibility for the task, divides to subtasks between the group members in the final stage of the preparation of the task prior to its submission, We went through the task together and examined what can be improved or added. So the perceived value of the collaborative tasks. Wait a second, sorry. Just a second. Okay, so the students appreciated in these statements the contribution and benefit of this kind of learning, both for themselves as students and teachers. Their statements related to the work of the group as a whole without relating to their own functioning. So, as we see, we have results and I would say the added relevance. So I will speak only about the added without showing. I will show very shortly the results. 1 more minute I left, all right? So I will come up with the discussion. What we see that we can found due to the reading that was taking place in this conference, we found the equivalent between our approach to CBAA approach taken by Maciej Karbowski and Begato, published in 2018. We can see that the parallel between confidence in functioning in our theory and creative confidence, and the parallel between perceived value of collaboration and perceived value of creativity. So come up in the end. Just a second, sorry. So our findings shows that working together to construct knowledge is very often reveals gaps between potential and actual work, which led to distress, trouble talk among participants. Awareness of such situation and how to handle them may not only provide an immediate response to alleviate the distress, but also encourage new relationships and understanding among team members. The experience we have acquired shows that systematically providing an immediate response to any trouble talk may support the ability to overcome it, encourage a rapid return to full functionality, and support a completion of the learning products. However, this issue should requires further research. And thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Adva? Any questions? Any questions?
No questions?
No
so
questions?
Here is some insight for the future.
Yes. No questions? Well, it's
no question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Adva.
Comes from the reality back into creativity. Sometimes we need to, I would say, encourage ourselves to do so. And collaborative way, I found out that works very well. Also for my students who did their learning in Netivot, which is really close to Gaza Strip. And this year, there were few times when their academic education has been stopped. And obviously, unfortunately, I was the only lecturer who wrote them if they need any help. I'm there for them. And later on, when they get back into their study, it was easier to go back. And they said that due to my responsibility, and they know that I'm there for them, it was quite easy for them to get back into routine, although it was quite hard to do so. So thank you.
Thank you for giving us an insight into that, because I think that we all, I mean, in Australia, certainly education goes on and you take it for granted, but the creative response to challenge like that and trauma is amazing. So well done. Thanks for sharing. So the next speaker is Andreia Valquaresma. And she's been working for several years as a psychologist in educational contexts and she's going to tell about her PhD in psychology at the Faculty of Psychology and Education Sciences at the University of Porto in Portugal. And her doctoral thesis is Challenges of Contemporaneity, What Course to Creativity, seeks to draw a comprehensive exploration of the influence of education, creative self-efficacy, and aesthetic judgment in creativity from a development point of view. Please welcome Andreia.
Thank you very much, Bam, and I have to say you have achieved with honors the task of saying my name with the correct accent, so you're on the right way to learn Portuguese. Well, as Bam correctly stated, I am actually presenting firsthand at least some of the results of my PhD thesis in psychology at the University of Porto. My proposal is to actually discuss how creativity can be perceived as being in a crossroad, exploring the potential impact of education, creative self-efficacy, and aesthetic judgment in establishing a complexity matrix for a contemporary understanding of the construct. Even I get out of breath saying this title. So the truth is that when I sent this abstract, it sounded quite more functional than what it really is. So maybe it will be helpful to guide you through a series of the intersections that I would like to approach here. Firstly, and of course, having creativity as the focal point, I would like to state how it intersects contemporaneity. I don't know if I invented this word, Ben, tell me. You found, no? Okay. Then, and because education is my favorite context of research, I would also allude to that. And entering psychological development, I chose to particularly focus on aesthetic judgment, creative self-efficacy, through a multi-level research design that will eventually and hopefully lead us to the need of framing creativity in a complexity matrix. So the truth is, and this has been stated many times during this conference, that nowadays in contemporaneity, creativity is actually facing a lot of challenges. Sometimes it's even seen as, or visioned like, the ultimate stronghold to face the challenges of the modern society. And this will eventually lead us to see how the intersection with education poses the fact that education hasn't been changing that much, maybe, or not in the sense that we would all hope. The truth is that by now, and regarding that this is not a problem of today, school should be focused in preparing students for the real world. I mean, when we remember or reminisce of Dewey, for example, he already stated this position. And the truth is that we should also be seeing a school that it's truly embedded in the surrounding environment, able to balance curricula and context in a way to help students co-construct a world of meaning in a future that it's pebbled with uncertainties. So maybe it's important to actually take the real shift and try to seek and promote the critical thinking, decision-making ability, social perspective, and creativity, just to name a few, in order to actually stimulate in the students this process of individuation construction. So when we approach this from a psychological point of view when concerning the development in psychology, we found that aesthetics was actually an interesting intersection between creativity and education. So we consider that taking aesthetic judgment as one of our indicators would be interesting. So we went to Michael Parsons and looked into a developmental framework of aesthetics epistemology, where he poses art as an implicit exploration of the self and the human nature through 5 stages of aesthetic development. And then we also thought that maybe it would be interesting to add another layer. Well, you'll see I'll have many layers. So another layer would be self-efficacy. And why self-efficacy when considering creativity? Because self-efficacy is acknowledged here as a characteristic of a dynamic psychological structure, able to confidently face unexpected challenges and define goals and expectations grounded in possibility thinking. So creative self-efficacy is also fundamental as an element of a system of beliefs that helps to shape one's creative identity, which will also approach us to the complexity matrix that we aim to achieve. Therefore, we went and searched for a multidimensional view on creative self-efficacy. And this is also noticeable in our research design, where the inventory that we chose to assess creative self-efficacy actually considers these two dimensions, creative thinking self-efficacy and creative performance self-efficacy. So here we are. I was speeding through to get to the main point. That is our multi-level research design. So departing from a mixed methods design, we defined an analytical distinction of 3 curricular levels. Okay, so school and curricula is our main focus. We went and searched and tried to explore the prescribed curriculum, the implemented curriculum, and the learned curriculum, and in the end, we would try to reconcile all of them and see where is the place of creativity in all of this. So, for the prescribed curriculum, what did we do? We went to the documents that exist in Portugal, the legal norms, the available governmental curricular programs, goals and guidelines for kindergarten and basic level of education. And from a pool of 194 documents, we selected 19 that we coded according to the type of reference to creativity, implicit or explicit, the conceptual relation that is actually posed with creativity, and the fact that they allude or not to the pedagogical didactic practices that are associated to it. Main results. Well, as I think this is kind of universal, of course creativity is important, of course the curriculum mentions it, although there is a quite large diversity of concepts and perceptions of creativity. So creativity appears strongly referred as a transdisciplinary competence of educational development, as an important part of and highly promoted by aesthetical and artistic education, but also really mentioned many times in its expressiveness facet, so a more immediate facet. After this, we went and we tried to figure out, close to the teachers that are actually the ones that get to implement the curricula in schools, and tried to see what they were thinking about this transition between the prescribed and the implemented curricula. What did we find out? Well, actually we had a lot of interesting and unexpected results, because although they all mentioned the importance of creativity and for education and all of that, we also got to 6 kinds of obstacles that they saw as being really hindering the development of creativity in the classroom. We have teachers' obstacles concerning the teacher himself, like his motivation and his professional satisfaction. And this is an important issue in Portugal, because the Portuguese teachers have been enduring a very hard time because they are not as well regarded by the society and by the parents, and they have a lot of obstacles, even economically speaking. We also found some quite interesting things concerning the attitudes of the teachers' class. I was particularly surprised by the fact that they consistently referred that inside the teachers' class there was a prejudice against the teachers that tried to develop creative activities. So maybe we are getting to the point that what the teachers are saying, that yes, creativity is important, in practice really doesn't happen. Well, this must also have something to do with the fact that the teachers' training in Portugal doesn't seem to consider creativity in their own curricula. They actually demand it when they go through their internship, but no one quite explores how they should do it while they are in training. Okay, so reaching to the learned curriculum, well, getting to the students. we assessed, as I mentioned, creative self-efficacy and artistic creativity and aesthetic judgment. So we had a sample of 393 students that were very equally divided through the levels of education and in a socioeconomic cultural level representation that actually resembles quite as well what happens in Portugal society. To assess the creative self-efficacy, as I mentioned, we had to adapt the creative self-efficacy inventory to the Portuguese population and to particularly the kind of population that we were considering that was ranging from the kindergarten to the 9th education grade. And we actually obtained some robust and reliable values. The structures are here. I'll probably move forward. If you have questions about this, we'll discuss it later. Well, and here it is. Well, it's not a very pretty image. I have to develop my creativity in that point, but it actually states that creative self-efficacy experiences this kind of changes through the educational level. And the fact is that this first major drop coincides with the transition of the cycle of education. So children move from the kindergarten to the first cycle. This was expected, well, because it's kind of a hard transition on them, creativity, when what concerns creativity. However, when we reach to the 8th grade and to the 5th grade, we actually obtained a small increase, and this was not expected. We were expecting that it would actually go straight down. We had to go and look for the data carefully, and we found out that actually this was probably due to the fact that one of the classes of each of these years was in an arts curricula. Probably that had some kind of impact. We are still looking further into it. There was also a positive effect of socioeconomic cultural level on creative self-efficacy. Okay, reaching to the artistic creativity, we assessed it through the consensual assessment technique, through drawings of flower and a tree, and here we have it. And I would like to have some of your insights about this probably, because we do have this major decrease by the 2nd year of the first cycle after they leave the kindergarten, and then it kind of floats in a way that is coincident with the cycle transition. So we quite don't know yet why is this happening in the 2nd grade. We need to look forward, to look further into this, and maybe you could actually be quite helpful. So the last part, that was the aesthetic judgment, was actually assessed through a semi-structured interview, and skipping to the results, here you can see creativity and aesthetic judgment crossed one with each other, and actually creativity may be important for the development of the aesthetic judgment of the children. So just to, I want to go back. Just to conclude it, I would like to state that our research seems to provide empirical information to consider creativity as a rather relational, dynamic, and complex construct that gains anima in a determined social-cultural context. So creativity can be envisioned as a structural attribute of the provisional outcomes of psychological development. It's a question that I pose. Maybe you can answer it. And for us, it is actually truly an intersection of complexities, where the enhancement of socio-cognitive dimensions will encourage dialogical relations with the world, feeding developmental changes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreia. So we've gone, I mean, it's really interesting looking at the Portuguese case study, where the teachers are frowned upon for adopting creative teaching, to Australia, where they actually all said that they want it and believe in it. But one of the themes that are that's coming out quite strong is that the education, the people who are creating the policy actually, and saying include creative education, don't know how to deliver it. And I think that adds to your complexity of your environment that you're talking about.
I agree with you. I think it's important to pass this message to them, to have them look into this so they can probably develop a new approach to the creativity. Yeah.
Any questions? Yeah, he does.
Thank you for that. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you showed the figures early on in the talk, but can you please remind me how many teachers were involved with each year group?
The focus group that I developed was with 6 teachers, okay? And they were actually teaching in Portuguese public schools from the kindergarten to the 9th grade. That was actually the population I was studying.
So where you saw that there was a drop in creativity or there was a rise in creativity?
That's in children. It's
Right.
not in teachers.
Yes, but was this in one class?
No, it was in the 2 classes. Let me go back, sorry.
So it couldn't be an effect of
This
the
one.
teacher. It couldn't just be an effect of the teacher that teacher was teaching in a particular way.
No,
It was
because
across-
that was actually happening on the 5th and on the 8th grade, and the common point was that they had that arts designed curriculum. Well, it was not supposed to be like that, but they were randomly given to us, and one of each of those years had that curriculum.
Hi, I just go on.
Yeah.
I have 2 small questions. By the way, I really like this research, especially also the mismatch that you actually
Thank
go
you
to the document
very
and then
much.
see.
Thank you.
So the first one, it reminds me a bit of the research of Kim. I think it was done in 2011, in which the multiple grades were compared, and then they speak of this so-called 4th grade slump.
Exactly.
Do you see the same patterns in your data? And
Yeah, I do. If you see here, I cannot point, I'm sorry. It says the 4th year, it has a major decrease, and then it has a slight increase, and it goes to the 5th. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. So this is the 4th. This is well, when they transition from kindergarten to the 1st grade, and this is the 4th grade, something that comes down, and then it only has this small decrease because of that arts curricula that I was telling you, and that happens also here. That's in the 8th grade. So we were not expecting this in middle of the cycles, but it eventually came out. Yeah.
And my second question was, but it's just to understand your data a bit, is this like panel data in which you follow the children through time, or is each point different children that you compare each other?
No, yeah, it's different children. It's cross-sectional, you see, so I gathered this during a period of time with those classes in those years, yeah.
And how many children on average on each observation point?
Well, the groups were quite balanced. I can give you the numbers, I don't have, but they were actually, that I could control. They were quite balanced in terms of size, yeah.
I think, Giovanni, time to finish, time for lunch.